Hi, my name is Trisha, and I'm in the Humane Teen Club from 2021 to 22. I'm going to talk about industrial farming, including what it is, some of its consequences, and what you can do about it. To start off, we're going to start with what industrial livestock production is. So it's when densely populated groups of animals are confined to cages, barns, or feedlots, and rather than these animals grazing or foraging, their feed, water, and medical inputs are provided to them, while their excrement is collected in ponds called lagoons, which is then sprayed onto nearby fields. Industrial livestock production is so far from the natural order of farming that these farms are now called animal feeding operations, or AFOs. About 95% of farm animals in the US are raised in AFOs, and these farms are regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency. Concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, are very large AFOs, and they house more than 1,000 animal units, and an animal unit is defined as the equivalent of 1,000 pounds of live weight. So now we're going to talk about some of the negative impacts of industrial livestock production. So to begin with environmental consequences. So commercial agriculture breeds intensive crop production. There's balanced system where crops feed animals and animal waste fertilize crops. What we have instead are depleted soils on one hand and toxically excessive animal waste on the other. The manure produced from the largest of the CAFOs is over 10 times the amount of waste produced by the entire US population annually. And why this is dangerous is because while human waste is treated in sewer systems and is subject to strict regulation, animal waste is stored in these lagoons and it's applied untreated as fertilizer to farm fields. The land where this manure and other toxins collect is not able to absorb that much waste, and this untreated extra waste gets into streams and other bodies of water. The high content of nitrogen and other nutrients in that waste creates dead zones in the water, which leads to decreases in oxygen levels, which prevents life and growth. Okay, so now on to the health consequences. So until banned by the FDA recently, animals used to be given doses of antibiotics regularly to prevent diseases and infections. About 80% of antibiotics in the US were sold for agricultural purposes yearly, and this overuse of antibiotics breeds bacteria that are antibiotic resistant. This is a serious concern because, according to the CDC, at least 2 million Americans per year are infected by antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and this leads to several tens of thousands of deaths in the US alone. So now I'm going to get into some of the politics of this issue. So first we're going to talk about why industrially produced meat is so cheap. So this meat is so cheap because the cost of certain parts of the production are paid for by taxpayers rather than the companies. Some of these costs include healthcare for asthma or other illnesses associated with CAFOs, the cost for cleaning polluted water, lowered property values when a CAFO moves in a local area, lost jobs and tax revenue as small businesses close due to corporate consolidation, and the cost to buy grain to feed livestock. So the cost to buy that grain has also decreased over the decades due to federal policies which have lowered the cost of corn and soybean production, which is what makes up the feed, and it allows for companies to purchase the feed at a much lower price than what it takes to produce it. So these cost externalizations have occurred because of how politically important and powerful the agribusiness and meat industry have become. Because CAFOs are classified as agricultural businesses and not industrial, despite their large-scale production, they don't have to go through the appropriate level of regulation for the amount of pollution that they produce at that scale. Also, the legislation that is usually made to protect the public from economic, environmental, and health consequences from these businesses has instead been made to heavily favor them due to their large political influence. So the reason they've been able to do this is because of a program called Checkoff. This program basically requires farmers to pay a small tax on every animal that's sold, and that tax, paired with the consumer tax on meat products, goes towards private trade groups. These groups represent large-scale meat industries instead of family-owned farms, and these trade groups lobby for policies in favor of the large industries. So now we're going to talk about animal welfare. So there's an overwhelming amount of harm and inhumane conditions that animals on CAFOs are subjected to. So to categorize animal harms, there's a scale of animal harms developed by the animal ethics philosophers Fraser and McRae in 2011. I'm going to be using that to provide an overview for the extent of this issue. So they're categorized into 4 different types. So with type 1, these type 1 harms include keeping domestic or captive animals for companionship, or livestock entertainment, laboratory use, racing, and security. This also covers confinement and behavioral deprivation, and painful procedures like dehorning and separating adults from offspring. And also, additionally, livestock transport, which, like overheating and overcrowding, are some of the harms caused by that. Some type 2 harms are causing deliberate harm to animals through activities such as slaughter, pest control, fishing, hunting, and toxology testing. Some type 3 harms include causing direct but unintended harm to animals through land clearings, window strikes, and vehicle collisions. And some type 4 harms are negatively affecting the welfare of animals indirectly through disturbing ecological systems through processes like climate change, pollution, and introducing invasive species. So a poll in 2015 found that about 94% of Americans believe that animals should have some type of protection from harm and exploitation. So what can you, as the consumer, do about this? So the first thing is to buy sustainably raised meat and animal products directly from small farmers whenever possible, whether this is from the farmer's market, local CSA operations, or other small farm products. This supports your local economy, and it also supports sustainable animal agriculture. To also help with the price difference of buying industrially produced meat versus pasture-raised meat, you can also try to eat less meat per week. Some things such as meatless Mondays is a great way to do that. So the next thing you can do is read labels carefully. So you want to be careful of vague terms as they lack clear standards. So some of those terms are the term like natural, pasture-raised, humanely raised, no antibiotics, cage-free or free-range, grain-finished, and vegetarian-fed. And you also want to educate yourself about different labels that are verified. So some of these labels on the right here are pretty common ones that are verified. Another thing you can do is get to know your farmer or local butcher, and you can ask them yourself about how the animals were raised and if they were slaughtered humanely. Alright, so these are my sources that I use. So hopefully you learned something about industrial farming and livestock production that you didn't know before, as well as some of the many different ways that you can actively support sustainable farming practices. Thank you for listening.